"Take the bus to your Harvard ceremony," my father, Gerald Collins, 54 years old, said like he was giving me directions to a grocery store. I was standing in my childhood kitchen in Cincinnati, Ohio, 24 years old, holding my master's graduation program, my name printed in it, magna cum laude, and he was explaining why a 14-hour drive to Boston wasn't practical. "My name is Maya Collins, Harvard graduate, junior research analyst at a Boston biotech firm. Full merit scholarship, every dollar, every semester, every late night, mine alone. Dad never wrote a single check. Never made a single trip." Then he added quietly, almost gently, "You've always handled things yourself, Maya. You don't really need us there." I didn't respond. I looked at him for one long moment. Then I pulled out my phone and started counting. I called my closest friend Diane Foster, 25 years old, my Harvard classmate and now my coworker at the biotech firm, the sharpest person I have ever known. I told her about the bus comment, about the "you don't need us" line. She didn't gasp. She said, "Pull every receipt you remember, every gift, every expense. We're making a list." My younger sister Brooke Collins, 21 years old, was never cruel. She was simply the one Dad chose, quietly and consistently, without ever announcing it. My mother, Linda Collins, 52 years old, gentle and permanently conflict-averse, watched everything happen and kept every opinion sealed behind a careful smile. Diane called me back 2 hours later. Her voice was measured, the way it gets when something is worse than she expected. "Maya," she said quietly, "look at these numbers, side by side, tell me what you see." The list Diane built was quiet and devastating. Brooke's 16th birthday, New York trip, Broadway tickets, Fifth Avenue shopping. Brooke's high school graduation, a party, a MacBook, $5,000 cash. Brooke's first apartment, Dad co-signed, paid the deposit, furnished it completely. Total across 6 years, $47,000. My Harvard years, 4 of them. Dad's total contribution, 0. Not one visit. Not one care package, not $1. I had covered everything through scholarship, part-time work, and careful meal planning. I stared at those 2 columns until my eyes hurt. Then Diane said, "Maya, look at the Bentley purchase date." I looked. Dad had bought it around the same time my Harvard acceptance letter arrived at the house 4 years ago. He bought it quietly, said nothing to me, and gave it to Brooke the week I walked across the Harvard stage. I sat with that Bentley date for 3 days. The timeline kept rearranging itself in my mind, my acceptance letter arriving at the house, Dad reading it, saying nothing to me, then driving to a dealership and writing a check for Brooke. I needed to stop reconstructing and start documenting. I called Professor Alina Hatch, 61 years old, my Harvard thesis advisor, the woman who watched me work 4 straight years without a single family member in any audience, at any ceremony, at any award night. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what I was doing, quietly, no dramatics. She paused, then, "Maya, come to my office, I have something you need to see." I drove to Cambridge the next morning. She pulled a folder from her bottom drawer, thick, worn at the edges, clearly years old. She placed it between us and said, "Someone needed to keep this," so I did. Inside the folder, every award letter, crisp and dated. 8 commendations across 4 years, every ceremony program with my name highlighted, and at the very back, a photograph I had never seen, my Harvard graduation, the auditorium, thousands of seats. The section reserved for family, one name card sitting untouched on an empty chair. My name, printed, waiting, never claimed. I couldn't speak. Then Professor Hatch said quietly, "There was one family member there, Maya." He sat 3 rows back and took this photograph quietly from the back row. He didn't want to interrupt your moment. I knew immediately. My uncle, Dennis Collins, 57 years old, Dad's older brother, the quietest, steadiest man I have ever known. He had driven to Boston alone, 14 hours, told no one, watched me walk across that stage, and kept a photograph I never knew existed. If this story is sitting with you, stay with me. Subscribe. Because what Uncle Dennis kept is about to matter more than anyone expected. I called Uncle Dennis that evening. He answered like he'd been waiting. I asked why he never told me he was there. He said, "It wasn't about me, Maya. Someone from this family needed to witness what you did, so I went." I stayed on the line longer than I planned. The next morning, Diane sent Brooke the side-by-side numbers, not to wound her, just because she deserved the full picture. Brooke went very quiet for 2 hours, then she didn't call me, she called Dad. I found out from Mom, whose voice sounded different, lighter, like something long held had finally been released. Brooke had said, "Dad, did you know what the numbers looked like? Did you actually know?" Dad's response came back through Mom in 3 words, "She never asked." I felt something cold settle in my chest, not anger, clarity. He had been keeping score too, just a very different one. Dad called me that evening. He wanted to talk. I said, "Come to Boston." He arrived the next afternoon looking smaller than I remembered, not because he had changed, but because I finally had the full picture and he sensed it. Professor Hatch's folder sat on my kitchen table, Diane's side-by-side document, Uncle Dennis's photograph, the empty chair, my name card, untouched. Dad looked at the photograph first. For a second I thought he might stand up and walk out. He didn't. He sat very still. Then he said, "Maya, I always believed you were the practical one, the strong one. You built your own path. I thought that meant you preferred it that way." I said, "You decided that for me. You never asked." He opened his mouth, closed it, then used that word again, practical, like a shield he had carried so long he forgot it was also a weapon. I slid the folder across the table. He opened it. His hands went completely still. Dad went through the folder slowly, award letter by award letter, 8 commendations he had never seen, had never once asked about. I watched his face move through something I didn't have a clean word for, not guilt yet, something before guilt, something like a man realizing the full shape of a room he thought he already knew. Then he reached the undergraduate graduation program, the back section, family members in attendance, a blank line where a parent's name should have been, his name, never written, never there. He stared at that line. I said nothing. Documents speak more clearly than arguments. Then Uncle Dennis walked in. I had asked him to come. He placed one item beside the folder, a single photograph, the auditorium, the empty chair, my name card, waiting. Dad stared at it, then very quietly he said, "I thought you'd understand. You always understood everything." I felt the room shift. Nobody spoke for what felt like the longest silence I have ever sat inside. Uncle Dennis stood by the window, arms crossed, saying nothing, meaning everything. Brooke had driven from Cincinnati overnight, 14 hours, no announcement, and sat beside me, her hand pressed flat on the table like she needed something solid. Mom sat across from Dad, not looking at him. The photograph stayed between us all. Dad's hand moved slowly to cover his mouth. He looked at Uncle Dennis first, the brother who drove 14 hours alone and kept silent for 4 years. Then at Brooke, whose face held guilt still finding its full shape. Then at me. He asked one question, no defense in it, no explanation, just, "Did you ever think about not going?" About just not going. I looked at him steadily. I said, "Every single day, Dad, every single day," and I went anyway. The room stayed silent, and in that silence, everything was finally completely said. Dad arranged a dinner 3 weeks later. Not a grand gesture, just a table, all of us together, my name written on a cake nobody announced in advance. Simple, quiet, real. Brooke sat beside me the whole evening, close, like she was making up for distance she hadn't known existed until now. Uncle Dennis made a toast so short it was almost nothing and meant absolutely everything. Mom held my hand under the table when she thought no one was looking. I let her. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't an erasure of 14 hours he never drove, of $47,000 that moved in only one direction, of a name card sitting on an empty chair that nobody came to claim. Those things happened, they are part of my story, but so is this dinner, so is Brooke's hand on my shoulder. So is Uncle Dennis's quiet drive to Boston 4 years ago, 14 hours alone, just to make sure someone from this family witnessed my name being called. I used to think that needing nothing made me strong. Now I know it just made me easier to overlook. The people worth keeping are the ones who show up without being asked, who keep records when you forget to, who drive through the night just to sit 3 rows back and say nothing, because their presence says everything. If this story sat somewhere real inside you, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, were you the child nobody celebrated? Were you the one they called practical when they meant convenient? I want to hear you, every single one of you. He told me to take the bus to Harvard. I walked that stage alone, then I built my own road and didn't leave a seat for excuses.